My girlfriend called me her loyal dog to show off to her friends, so I put her in her place. Before we go on, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. The problem began when I started noticing a pattern I initially wanted to minimize. Every time we were with her friends, Yesenia changed. It wasn't a subtle change, it was almost automatic. She'd go from being kind to becoming the person who made constant jokes, sarcastic comments, and attitudes that viewed coldly bordered on contempt. And the worst part is that treatment wasn't for everyone, it was only towards me. At first, I thought it was her way of fitting in with her group. She's always had very dominant friends, very self-assured, with quite a sharp wit. I told myself maybe Yesenia was exaggerating a bit not to be left behind, not to seem boring. I decided not to take it personally. Big mistake. The first situation I remember clearly occurred at a gathering at one of her friends' houses. It was a pool party, something informal. Before leaving, Yesenia insisted on helping me choose what to wear. It didn't seem strange to me. Many couples give opinions on each other's clothes. She suggested a pink shirt and green shorts. It was nothing extravagant, light colors, comfortable clothes. I thought it was fine for the atmosphere. When we arrived, as soon as I crossed the door, I noticed the looks. First there were contained smiles, then open laughter. Her friends started pointing at my clothes, whispering among themselves. I didn't understand what was happening. Then Yesenia, laughing too, said loudly, "See? I told you he'd do everything I said. I turned him into Patrick Star." They all laughed harder. I stood still not knowing what to say. At that moment I took it as a silly joke. I smiled. I pretended it didn't affect me. I thought, it's not a big deal. It's not worth ruining the night. Today I know I should have set a boundary there. After that, the comments became more frequent. They weren't just about my clothes or superficial things anymore. They started touching on our relationship dynamic. At another gathering, while everyone was dancing and drinking, Yesenia sat down and sighed exaggeratedly. She said loudly, "I'm tired of dancing so much. Good thing I always have my personal butler at home. Franco always does what I ask." Some friends laughed. Others nodded as if it were an admirable truth. I felt a different kind of discomfort. This time it wasn't just a joke. It was a way of presenting me as someone without their own criteria, as if I existed only to serve her. Still, I said nothing. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that she didn't mean it. The comment that started to weigh on me most occurred weeks later. We were gathered again, this time with a few couples. Yesenia, already several drinks in, said, "Girls, you should train your boyfriends like I do mine. Men need a woman to guide them. Without us, they're lost. They're like little puppies." This time I didn't laugh. No one looked at me directly, but I felt several people grow uncomfortable. Some boyfriends looked down. I felt embarrassed, but also angry. Not because of an isolated phrase, but because I was beginning to understand that for Yesenia, humiliating me in front of others was a way to gain status within her group. The situation reached a critical point at one of the last gatherings. One of her friends' boyfriends commented he was planning a bachelor party. He explained it wouldn't be anything wild. He wanted to spend a quiet weekend in his hometown. He said his father could lend them the family ranch. There'd be horseback riding, barbecue, and some thought about hunting deer, something very traditional for them. The idea of horseback riding caught my attention. I've always wanted to ride a horse, but I've never had the opportunity. When I asked if I was up for it, I said yes, that it seemed interesting. Before I could finish the sentence, Yesenia interrupted. "Of course you won't go. Who knows what bitch you'll find there?" The silence was immediate. No one laughed. Everyone looked at each other. I felt a mix of surprise and rage. I tried to stay calm and said, "I'm interested in the horseback riding. I've always wanted to do it." Yesenia raised her voice without caring that everyone was listening. "You're not going into story. I'm in charge of this relationship, and you shut up." Some of her friends nervously laughed. The boyfriends looked clearly uncomfortable. I couldn't hide my annoyance anymore. Before I could say anything, she changed her tone. "Honey, it's a joke, but not going is true. I just fear something might happen to you." For me, it was no longer a joke. Something had broken. I felt exposed, infantilized, treated like someone without the right to decide. Later, well into the night, I decided to do something that in retrospect was impulsive, but also revealing. When I finished my beer, I said loudly, Yesenia, bring me another beer. She looked at me surprised and replied, Of course not, you go. I used an exaggerated, clearly ironic tone and said, Go get my beer. Be a real woman and attend to your man. The atmosphere changed immediately. Yesenia got upset. Her friends too. Before anyone could say anything else, I clarified. It's just a joke, just like she jokes with me. I got up and went for my beer. When I came back, the friends were already commenting among themselves, not bothering to lower their voices. That's sexism in disguise. Be careful, Yesenia. Maybe his true machismo is starting to show. Sexist jokes in 2025. Get updated. No one mentioned the previous jokes. No one talked about the context. Only I had crossed the line. On the way home, Yesenia didn't stop talking. She accused me of being sexist, disrespectful, of having humiliated her in front of her friends. I tried to explain to her that I'd only replicated the same type of comment she'd been making to me for months. She didn't want to hear it. Finally, tired, I told her we needed a clear agreement. No more jokes towards me in front of others, and I wouldn't make jokes toward her. No humiliations disguised as jokes, no power games. After several excuses and justifications, she accepted. She said it was fine, that she understood. After that agreement, I really thought things would change, not in a magical way, but at least enough so the relationship stopped feeling like a competition or a spectacle in front of other people. For several days, Yesenia was calmer. There were no sarcastic comments or uncomfortable jokes. I wanted to believe she'd understood the point. The next gathering was at one of her friends' houses. From the moment we arrived, the atmosphere felt different. There wasn't that constant tension I'd already learned to identify. The girls were in the kitchen chopping vegetables, laughing among themselves, talking about everyday things. Nothing directed towards me. Outside, in the patio, the boyfriends were in charge of grilling the meat. It was a normal dynamic, without impositions or mockery. I felt good, relaxed, even optimistic. I thought maybe I'd exaggerated the previous episodes in my head, that the agreement had worked. As we flipped the meat, one of the guys, the boyfriend of one of Yesenia's friends, approached me and spoke in a low voice. Hey, everything feels different today, doesn't it? Yesenia is very calm. I nodded with a slight smile. Yeah, we talked a bit about it and agreed to treat each other with due respect. The guy smiled, genuinely surprised. That's great, honestly. What mature couple. I replied, almost automatically, still with that feeling of relief. Sure, talking is how people understand each other. And for a moment, I truly believed it. Not even 5 minutes had passed when I heard Yesenia's voice from the kitchen. Franco, can you bring me my purse? I left it in the car. It didn't seem strange at all. I told her yes and walked toward the car. I opened the doors, checked the seats, the trunk, even under the seats. There was nothing. I rechecked more calmly, thinking maybe I'd overlooked it. Nothing. I returned to the house and told her, I didn't find it. Are you sure you didn't leave it at home? Yesenia shook her head. No, I brought it. Well, maybe it's in the upstairs living room. Can you look for it there, please? I went upstairs, checked the living room, the couches, the tables, even the nearby bathroom. There was no purse. I started to feel a slight discomfort, but I still didn't suspect anything. To avoid going back and forth, I decided to call her on the phone. Yesenia, there's nothing there. Don't you have any idea where else it might be? From the other end of the line, she replied in a soft, almost singing tone. It must be there, honey. Look. As she spoke, I could hear laughter in the background, not open laughter but contained giggles. At that moment, something clicked inside me. A familiar, unpleasant sensation. I walked downstairs with a tense stomach. I approached her and said, more seriously now, there was nothing, Yesenia. Then it happened. She let out an open, exaggerated laugh, reached behind her, and pulled out her purse, showing it as if it were a magic trick. It was always here. You need to sharpen that nose, puppy. Laughter exploded all around. Her friends doubled over with laughter. See, I tell you he'll do what I tell him. My poor little boyfriend. I felt something break. It wasn't immediate anger. It was a mix of shame, betrayal, and accumulated exhaustion. I took a step forward and said in a firm voice, Enough, Yesenia. She looked at me with a smile that was no longer sweet at all. Don't get mad, honey. It's just a joke. I just wanted to show them you were still my loyal puppy. That's when I lost control. I didn't shout, but my voice came out harsh, cutting. Hey, are you stupid or what? The silence was absolute. The laughter died instantly. All eyes were fixed on me. I continued unchecked. What kind of jokes are these? Can you stop acting like an idiot for a second? Yesenia's eyes widened, visibly surprised, and she replied in an offended tone. Calm down. Honey, it's not like you need to insult me. That only made everything worse. And all the insults towards me that I replied, I'm fed up with you. You're just an idiot who wants to impress her idiot friends. One of the friends immediately intervened, turning to her boyfriend. Honey, do you see what this guy said to me? The boyfriend approached me with a tense expression. Are you drunk, bro? Calm down. He took me by the arm and pulled me aside. I suddenly shook him off. Your girlfriend treats you the same way, I told him. Only she's not as expressive as my idiot girlfriend. I said it without thinking, but not without conviction, because at that moment I saw it clearly. I'd noticed before how that guy's girlfriend also corrected him, ridiculed him in a low voice, spoke to him condescendingly. Not as obvious, not as theatrical, but it was there. The atmosphere was unbreathable. No one knew what to say. Some avoided looking at me. Others looked at Yesenia, expecting her to react. I felt my chest tight, my hands trembling, not from alcohol, but from everything I'd accumulated for months. The other girl's boyfriend was the first to react after my words. He stood in front of me with a frown, trying to regain control of the situation. That's discussed in private and not in front of everyone, he said firmly. And I won't allow you to insult my girlfriend. I looked at him for a few seconds. I didn't say it with mockery. I said it with weariness, almost with genuine curiosity. Show her you defend her, I replied. You're a loyal puppy too. The guy tensed immediately. He took a step towards me, clearly annoyed. But what no one expected was his girlfriend's reaction. Instead of being outraged, she started laughing. It wasn't a nervous or uncomfortable laugh. She was genuinely laughing. The guy turned to her disconcerted. What are you laughing at? I mean, I'm defending you and you're making fun of me. She continued laughing a few more seconds before answering. It was just funny. That comment completely threw him off. He stood looking at her as if he didn't recognize her. Then he turned to me with a bitter expression and said, Well, maybe you weren't so wrong. She is an idiot. He said it without raising his voice, but with a mix of disappointment and anger that felt heavy. Immediately afterwards, he grabbed his things and left the party without saying goodbye to anyone. The door closed loudly. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The silence was uncomfortable, almost dense. Then the girl, as if nothing had happened, looked at Yesenia and said, Yesenia, calm your boyfriend down. He made mine angry. That phrase made my blood boil. Not because of what she said, but because of the lightness with which she reduced everything to a fleeting annoyance, as if the problem was that someone had left, not everything behind it. Yesenia took a step forward. She wasn't laughing anymore. Her face was tense, her arms crossed. You're an incurable sexist, she told me. Insulting all the women here is stooping very low. That was the final straw for me. I felt the anger I'd been holding back spill over. I replied without shouting, but with a clarity that no longer tried to spare anyone. Again with the sexism? I said, Is that all you know how to say? I'm not insulting you because you're a woman. I'm insulting you because you're a person desperate for attention, who doesn't have her own humor and needs to make fun of others to show off to her friends, who are just as empty as you. Some of them opened their mouths, others shook their heads. No one interrupted me. And you know what? I continued. It's over. You're a constant nuisance, and I'm also an idiot for not having sent you away sooner. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want to hear her. I grabbed my keys, my jacket, and walked towards the exit. I felt eyes fixed on my back, but I didn't care. At that moment, I just wanted to leave. I left the house and breathed cold air. My heart was racing, my hands trembling. I walked straight to the car. As I was about to get in, I heard footsteps behind me. Franco, wait, said Yesenia. I didn't stop. I opened the door and sat behind the wheel. She arrived just as I was closing it. Please forgive me, she said. I went too far. I know. It was a joke. It got out of hand. I didn't want it to come to this. I started the car. She stood in front of the car, forcing me to break. "Franco, let's talk. Don't leave like this." I looked her in the eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt no guilt or desire to justify anything. "We've already talked," I told her, and nothing changed. She moved aside slowly. I started the car and hit the accelerator hard. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see her cry. I didn't want to hear any more explanations. The drive felt long, though it wasn't. As I drove, I replayed every scene, every comment, every laugh at my expense. I realized it wasn't an isolated argument. It was the culmination of months of enduring things I should never have allowed. I arrived at the apartment we shared, turned off the engine, and sat in silence for a few seconds. The place was dark and empty. I went upstairs, entered, and left the keys on the table. I didn't stay in the apartment long. In fact, as soon as I crossed the door, I knew I wouldn't spend another second there. Everything felt heavy, as if the place itself reminded me of every moment I stayed silent when I should have spoken. Every time I convinced myself I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal. I went straight to the bedroom. I opened the closet and took the essentials. Clothes, documents, phone charger. I didn't pack suitcases, I just put everything into a backpack. I didn't want to think too much or give myself time to doubt. As I packed my things, I realized something that left me cold. I didn't feel sadness, I felt tiredness, but also a kind of uncomfortable relief, like when you finally accept a truth you'd been avoiding for a long time. I left the apartment without looking back and drove to my parents' house. It was late at night, but they still welcomed me without unnecessary questions. They offered me to stay, gave me a place to sleep, and above all, silence. That silence was more restorative than any conversation. The next morning, I woke up to several missed messages from Yesenia. I didn't open them immediately. I took the time to think if I really wanted to hear from her again. In the end, I decided no. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd already said everything important the night before. Later, she called me. I let it ring until it cut off. Then she called again. I didn't answer. Finally, she wrote saying we needed to talk in person, that last night had gotten out of control, that it wasn't fair to end things like this. I replied with a single message, short and direct, that I didn't want to see her, that there was nothing more to talk about, and that she should leave me alone. I didn't mind the tone. I no longer cared about seeming kind. Her response arrived a few hours later, and it was long, very long. She called me a lesser man. She said how dared I leave her helpless and alone, that I was irresponsible. She accused me of running away instead of facing problems like a real man. She said all this showed I was an insecure macho, incapable of tolerating a woman shining brighter than him. That my ego couldn't handle a strong, confident, and dominant woman. I read the entire message without interruption. I felt no rage nor guilt. What I felt was clarity. For the first time, I understood that for her, I hadn't been a partner, but a resource, someone who validated her image in front of others, someone she could use as an example, as an accessory, as a target for jokes to feel superior. When I stopped fulfilling that role, when I set a real boundary, she stopped seeing me as someone with whom I shared and started seeing me as an enemy. I didn't reply to her. I blocked her number. That day I sat alone in my parents' backyard and thought about everything that had happened. I wondered at what point I confused enduring with being understanding, at what point I started to believe that respect was negotiable. I realized I'd normalized things that if I'd seen them from the outside, I would never have accepted. I also reflected on something I found hard to admit. I allowed many of those situations, not because I liked them, but because I was afraid of losing her. I thought that if I spoke up, if I was uncomfortable, if I showed firmness, she'd leave. In the end, when I spoke up, when I stood my ground, everything indeed broke. But not because I was wrong, but because the relationship only worked as long as I remained silent. I understood that respect isn't just not yelling or not hitting. Respect is also not ridiculing, not minimizing, not using the other as a tool to gain social approval. And I understood something even more uncomfortable. A relationship where one shines at the expense of the other isn't a relationship. It's a power dynamic. I don't consider myself a victim or a hero. I made many mistakes. I stayed where I shouldn't have. I was silent when I should have spoken, but I also learned. Today I know clearly that I don't want to be with someone who needs to humiliate to feel strong, nor with someone who confuses control with love. Nor do I want to be the person who accepts jokes that hurt just to maintain peace. Maybe for some I overreacted, maybe for others I reacted late, but for me it was the necessary final point. Sometimes putting someone in their place doesn't mean humiliating them back, but leaving where you should never have stayed.